Good morning, church.
Good morning.
I hope you're as excited as I am about the new resident minister program that's going to be starting here this next summer. Today is the day for our Fifth Sunday contribution, in which we will put aside everything over the budget as far as funds to help to begin that program. So I hope that you came prepared for that. If indeed you forgot, we do have our debit credit card machine in the hallway, and you're more than welcome to use that if that's something that you desire to do. As we get started today, I'll tell you a story that I heard of two young men. Two young men who were walking along trying to find something to do, killing the day. There's always some danger in that. But they came along to an old well, and they looked down into the darkness of the well, and they couldn't see the bottom. Being curious as young men often are, they took a pebble and they threw it into the well. And they listened. And they listened. And they listened. And they never heard a splash. So naturally they took a larger stone and they threw it into the well. And they listened. And they listened. And they didn't hear any splash. Well, this caused them to be very curious. So they looked around for something even bigger. And there was a railroad tie not far away from the edge of the well. And they got a hold of it together and they drug it to the edge and they pushed this railroad tie over to the side, and they listened. And they listened. And they listened. And they never heard a splash. But what did surprise them is out of nowhere came this goat, just running full speed, and he leapt over the edge down into the depths and darkness of that well. Well, that was certainly an unexpected event. And they were pondering what this could mean when, after a few moments, a farmer came by and said, "Have you fellas seen a goat anywhere? I tell you, I'm sure that I tied him to a railroad tie around here somewhere." And the moral to that story is this: we need to watch what we're tied to, don't we? Because whatever you're tied to, when it goes down, you go down. There's a lot of things that we can be tied to in this world. We can be tied to our jobs and our career. And that's not always a bad thing, but it can be. We can be tied to relationships, to friendships. And that can be a wonderful thing to be tied to, but it can also be dangerous. Because whatever you're tied to, when it goes down, you go down. You see, the moral of watch what you're tied to is a valuable instructional tool. And we have to ask the question as believers, are we tied to the things of this world more strongly than we are to the things of God? Than we are to spiritual truths and meaningful, eternal principles. You see, when the world falls, we have to ask, will it drag us down with it? Look over in the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. And Jesus addresses this same idea and principle when he says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on this earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. For the lamp of the body is the eye, and if therefore the eye is good, your whole body will be full of light." So he's telling us in different words, using a little different illustration, the same principle. Watch what you're tied to. Because if your treasure, if that which matters most to you, if that which you're holding to most tightly are the things of this world, then those are not secure things. From the eternal, from the true perspective, those are not secure. Because they decay and they moth, and the moths and the rust come and they're destroyed over time. And if that's what you're tied to, if that's what you're clinging to tightly, he says when they go down, you go down. It's a very vital principle all throughout Scripture. You see, we live in a world And the challenge is to live in this world, to exist in this world, to interact in this world, to work in this world, but not be tied to this world. It's almost like a scuba diver. Now, I've never been scuba diving. I've been snorkeling a few times when we've been on vacation, but I have a little bit of high blood pressure, so if I'm honest on that questionnaire, they won't let me go. But I've always thought that would be thrilling, to go down into the sea. But what's intriguing about that, the difference between that and snorkeling or just free diving, is that you can stay down there, you can exist as long as you take your environment with you. You see, a scuba diver, he is enveloped by the world, by the sea. He is completely surrounded by the sea, but he's not affected by the sea. He's not destroyed. He's not killed by that dangerous environment around him, because right there with him, he takes his own environment with him. He takes it with him as he goes down into the dangers of the depths. And in many ways, that's what the Scriptures are instructing us in regard to. In John chapter 17, 14 through 19, Jesus again will speak, and he's praying here about his disciples. And he says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. He's saying they're enveloped by the world. The world's all around them, and the world would destroy them. It would kill them if it had the chance. So what do? He says, Lord, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. For they are not of this world, just as I am not of this world. So sanctify them, Lord, in your truth. Your word is truth. For as you sent me into this world, I have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they may also be sanctified by truth. You see, this truth is that environment we take with us into the hostile world around us. It's what protects us every day from everything in our environment that would destroy spiritually. Now, the importance of this subject is really brought home in 1 John chapter 2. And this is where we're going to spend our time this morning. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. As John will describe for us through the inspiration of the Spirit exactly how it is that Satan attempts to tie us to this world so that we'll be destroyed along with it. And what's intriguing about each of these three basic points, these three strategies, if you will, that Satan tries to use to wrap us up with the world, is that in and of themselves, they're not wrong things. But Satan is the master corrupter. You know, it's like if you've ever had any type of food poisoning. There's nothing wrong with the food. It's just all the bacteria that goes with it that causes you to be sick. It's corrupted. But there are other situations and other circumstances where that very thing is fine, as long as it's not corrupted. What Satan tries to do is contaminate good things so that they tie you and wrap you up and will cause you to be destroyed. Because you see, he knows that, he doesn't come and just tempt us. Well, why don't you come and be a murderer or a serial killer? That's not typically a tempting thing for most people. Why don't you become a dictator and commit genocide? He doesn't throw those things at us. He throws at us subtle things. He twists things that in and of themselves are good and holy and righteous, and corrupts them so that we'll be poisoned and deceived and tied to the world. As we go through the text in 1 John 2, this is what he describes. Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in this world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. but he who does the will of God abides forever. Listen to those words. The world is passing away. He's saying the world is falling down into the depths of oblivion, of that well of eternity. As it passes away, don't be tied to it. Don't be pulled down with it. And he tells us this. Satan corrupts, first of all, the lust of the flesh. The lust of the flesh. That's his first point. And when we look at what that means, that's of course talking about sensual desire and gratification. Now, as we said before, this is a corruption of something that in and of itself is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a holy and a beautiful thing in the right context. God intended that man and woman marry and that they live a life together. They enjoy one another's company and that be a part of the relationship as God designed it. But what Satan and the world have done is they have corrupted it. They have corrupted and contaminated something that is supposed to be good and holy and righteous. They've done it through fornication, through adultery, through homosexuality, through all sorts of different avenues where they take that which God intended to be wholesome and good and righteous, and Satan corrupts it and uses that to tie people to this world. See, we live in a world, in a society that has gone crazy over physical gratification. And it's easy when you really look and you consider what's happened around us to realize that this is something God intended to be good, but it's been corrupted. I remember hearing an illustration one time that I thought was powerful. They said, what would it be like? What would you think if you walked into the grocery market and you went into the produce section and one of the produce workers was telling you about, in a group of people, about the newest fruit that had just arrived at the store from the fields, from the orchards. And he wanted to demonstrate how good that fruit was, if he started to peel off from the orange, and as soon as he started to peel off from the orange, the crowd just went crazy. It started to hoop and holler and just go nuts and wanted to keep peeling more from the orange. And just became enthralled with their desire for that fruit. We would think that there's something wrong with a society that's that crazy about wanting something to eat, wouldn't we? Now, there's nothing wrong with the fruit. We would admit that. We would realize something had been corrupted in their desire. That's the way it is with sensuality and what God intended. In and of itself, it's a holy, righteous thing in the right context. But Satan has managed to corrupt our culture, our society, and get them to put unholy additives, corruptions to that which he intended. You see, when we look at this principle, we realize that lustful extremes are not natural, but they are indeed a corruption of what God intended. When you look at James chapter 1, 13 through 15, it says it this way. Let no one say when he is tempted that I am tempted of God, but God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desire and enticed. And when his desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when it is full grown, it brings forth death. He describes for us there the exact process of corruption that takes place. Satan takes a good desire, a natural desire in the right setting, in the right context, and he causes it to become an evil desire for things which are not good. And when that desire is conceived, then it brings about sin in our lives. It's kind of like a cancer cell. You know, a cancer cell, the difficulty we have with cancer is because it is not a pathogen in the same way as other diseases. It's not bacterial. It's not viral. It's not a protozoan. It's not some kind of organism that comes from the outside as a parasite. It's your own cells. It's our own cells that have become corrupted. And now, that corruption starts to spread to other cells. And that's precisely the only resource that Satan has, is to take things which are intended to be good and righteous and holy and corrupt them so that that corruption will spread. The second thing he mentions in our text is he talks about not only the lust of the flesh, but he talks about the lust of the eyes. The desire for things above all else. Now, Jesus addressed this in the text we read a moment ago when he talked about that we don't need to put up our treasures on this earth where moth and rust destroy. In short, this is speaking of materialism and what a poor investment it is. There was a woman in 1975 who, there was a string of bank robberies, and one of them hit a bank where she had a safe deposit box, and they cleaned out the safe deposit boxes. She had $7 million in valuables in that safe deposit box. And when she found out, she fell to the floor, weeping and in agony, considered ending her life. And folks said, well, you know, they're trying to catch him. They're trying to find. She said, it doesn't matter, my whole life was in there. My whole life is over. Now, we all would say that's a lot. But it should never be anyone's whole life. But that's what the devil wants. He wants to take something which in and of itself is not bad. It's not bad to have something good to eat. It's not bad to have somewhere nice to live. It's not bad to have something good to drive. It's not bad to have clothes that are comfortable. Unless those are the things that encompass your whole life. Unless if you lose those things, you say, my whole life is gone. What you're saying is that's what I was tied to. And when moth and rust or thieves break in and steal, then I will be drugged right along with them. See, materialism is so very, very destructive. Satan has pulled such a con on us. Just imagine. Imagine you were to go and there was a slick salesman. He were to talk you into pulling your entire life savings to purchase something. Something that's perishable. And I tell you, I like a lot of perishable things. I like an ice cream cone, don't you? On a hot summer day. Or a Slurpee or a snow cone or whatever it may be. Anybody like that on a hot summer day? I love that. And I'll pay $1, and sometimes I've probably paid $5 for a good milkshake on a hot day at times. But I've never paid $50 for one. And I've never paid $500 for one. And I've never paid $5,000 for one. And I've never paid $50,000 for one. You know what the devil has gotten our world to do? He has talked people in to paying their entire life savings, spiritually speaking, for a milkshake on a hot summer day. Something that's perishable, that's going to melt just like that. See, that's what this world is. It's nothing but perishable things that in the grand scheme of eternity are only here for the blink of an eye. But yet people, and I don't mean that they spend their money on it, I mean they spend their eternity on it. They invest everything they have. They're forever in things that are going to melt away. In things that are perishable. What a salesman he is. What a salesman. The third thing that's mentioned in the text is the pride of life. See, there's a kind of pride that's good too. When you're proud of your children because they do right and good. When you're proud of your church because it's moving forward and doing good things for the Lord. When you're proud of yourself for accomplishments, not in an arrogant way, but in just a way that says, thank you, Lord, for helping me to achieve this. Pride can be a good thing. In fact, pride, God says of Jesus, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. That's pride. A good kind of pride. So Satan attempts to corrupt that into arrogance and self-reliance. Man becomes so confident in himself that he believes that he needs no one. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 18 through 20, Paul says it this way: "No one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He catches the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise when they are futile." You see, man allows something that should be good and holy and righteous to be contaminated and corrupted into arrogance and an absolute sense of self-reliance. We're like that general in the Civil War, Northern general, who was riding along high in the saddle, uniform perfectly pressed, as they were in the middle of a battle. And one of his underlings said, "General, you probably need to take cover." And the general scoffed at him, rebuked him, and said, "Look how far away they are. They couldn't hit an elephant from this distance." As he fell from the saddle dead, found out real fast that when pride becomes arrogance, if you're tied to that, you'll be pulled from the saddle. You'll be pulled into the well. You'll be pulled into eternity. Well, as we close out this morning, we simply ask the question, what are you tied to this morning? What is your life invested in more than all else? Because the reality is that Jesus died on a plain wooden cross. And he says, as we sing, we should cling to the old rugged cross. Be tied to that cross. But there's something else that's made out of wood that, if we're not careful, even though we're deceived, we may be tied to it. Because it represents where that well leads. For the wages of sin is death. Are we tied to a cross? Or are we tied to a coffin? Because if you're tied to this world, in the end result, that's what you're tied to. As you examine your ties this morning, if you need to make any change, if you need to make an adjustment, if you need to make repentance, don't delay. Make today the day that you tie, that you anchor your life firmly to the cross and undo all the other connections that threaten to pull you down as you come right now as we stand.